This is Leaders in the Trenches, and your host today is Gene Hammett.
Hi, this is Gene Hammett. I'm the host of Leaders in the Trenches. My question for you today is, how do you recognize your employees? Or do you recognize your employees? Do you have intentional plans and strategies in place to recognize the good behavior? Do you recognize them being honest with each other? Do you recognize innovation? Do you recognize them doing and living by the values of the company? I ask all this because I know a lot of companies will say that they do, but most of them don't. Most of them don't have intentional plans to recognize the employees, and that is a problem. If you're a leader, then you want to reinforce all of the good things that are going on inside the company so that they happen over and over and over. It makes your job a lot easier. So when you understand recognition and you understand how to put a plan and be intentional about that, you will be a better leader, plain and simple. Now, my guest today is Steve Pemberton with Global Force. We talk about recognition. We talk about some of the research. We talk about what drives employees to give to others. And we talk about the 1% rule inside of a company. You have to listen to the full interview to find out what the 1% rule is. But you will love this interview if you love being a leader and you love recognizing people and you want them to grow and you want them to grow fast. My name's Gene Hammett. I work with hyper-growth companies to understand that growth and help them become the leaders that they really want to be. And that is what I love to do. Here's the interview with Steve Pemberton. Hey, Steve, how are you?
Doing good, Gene. How are you?
I am fantastic. I'm glad to hear that you also love Mondays as much as I do, and today's Monday. So welcome to Leaders in the Trenches.
That is the start of something new. Every Monday is.
Well, I'll ask you about that in a second, but I want our audience to understand you first. So I've told them a little bit about you and your business, but tell them in your own words about who you serve and about who you are.
So my name is Steve Pemberton. My official title is Global Chief Human Resources Officer for Global Force. And we bring goodness to the world of work, by recognizing the good things that people do as part of their daily life. So it's peer-based recognition that creates sustainable and actually improves cultures.
Well, I'm excited to have this conversation because I talk all the time about how do you reinforce the good things that you want to happen, and you've got a pretty tight solution for that. So why do we need to reinforce good behaviors to improve our culture?
Yeah, it's a real life butterfly effect in the sense that when you're recognizing people for a job that is well done, the full effect and impact that has not, really measurable, at least in that moment, because it begets other behaviors, it begets discretionary effort, it drives innovation, it drives loyalty and commitment. But it's not necessarily just based on where traditionally a lot of culture has been, here's the things that aren't working. And particularly with the growth mindset, you always have to be attentive to competitive realities, right? Gaps in strategy. And if we're not careful, that can kind of create a adverse or negative reaction in our cultures within our organizations. So you need an active, to the point of your question, you really need an active process that gets the values and the words off the wall and into the culture.
Well, I get asked that all the time, and I kind of joke about it, like, companies that put up their stuff on the walls, but that's as far as it goes, doesn't really provide the impact of values. So I'd love for you to share with us, some of the things that you've learned about rewarding employees on, the work that they're doing or how they collaborate, how they communicate together. What could you share with us there?
Sure. So one of the things that we've learned, and we've gathered extensive data on recognition moments across our customer base. So we have a measurable way of determining what happens when you get the words off the wall and specifically into behaviors. So there's a number of impacts. I mean, some of them are the more obvious ones of keeping your best people because you recognize them for the job that they do well. But it also does other things. I think it attracts the right people to the organization as well because you are anchored in positivity. It drives innovation because a lot of your efforts are in areas that are anticipating changes, right? And rewarding people specifically for the risks that they take. So part of it is just kind of executing the job well, but you're also recognizing people when they take a risk on something, even if it doesn't necessarily turn out the way that they want it. So in Global Force, for example, one of those we have is called respect for innovation. It doesn't say respect for success in innovation. It says respect for innovation. That's our way within our culture of saying, okay, Gene, you took a risk here. You anticipated a market change. Here's how it happened. The outcome is secondary. We just want to reward you for that innovative behavior because that keeps us relevant and competitive.
You're probably not that close to the research I've done, but this is in alignment with two core areas of fast growth companies. So I study the top 1% of growth companies across the America. It's commonly referred to as the Inc. 5000. Mm-hmm. You know that list well, probably. Well, one of them is empowering innovation, and your platform, what you just talked about, was about innovation. But there's somewhere that a lot of people know that failure is okay, but as long as it's not on their team, as long as it's not them, as long as it's not, and I hear this all the time, as long as it's not so big that people notice. Right. What are you noticing about companies that reward failure in some way?
Well, one of the things I think it's not just fail, but it's failing fast. So a quick no is just as good as a long yes. So a lot of times creating a culture of honesty, courage, candor, and saying, hey, look, Gene, or you say to me, Steve, great idea, but I don't think it's going to fly, and here's all the reasons why. And I, in that moment, say, hey, Gene, thank you for that moment of candor, because I would have kept going down this path, right? And that's, and so we've seen countless examples of that. And you look at a failure as an example, and you think, well, how in the world didn't they know that was happening? They knew it was happening. They just didn't have a culture of rewarding people for candor, as an example. Yeah. That just becomes part of culture. That means you get a lot of candid feedback about something. So you're summarily, your choice is, so I'm going to have my colleague Gene tell me, or I'm going to have the marketplace to tell me. I'd rather Gene tell me.
Yeah. You talk about candor. The words I use inside my research was radical transparency, because these CEOs kept talking about how important it is to have transparency for us to grow, to collaborate, and not, be political and whatnot. A lot of these companies have, 10, 20, 30, maybe 100 employees. They don't have time to be political. And I'm trying to take the message out there to others. Are you seeing radical transparency as something that's being rewarded?
I see it emerging because of the number of challenges that organizations have faced, and have had to assess their own internal culture and say, well, how didn't we see that coming? Why didn't we anticipate that? Well, it's because the leaders in the trenches, as it began, specifically the ones in the trenches, weren't incentivized in any way, shape, or form to be radically transparent. So what are the things that leaders can do? One of the things that I've learned, because I will confess that I am very strong-willed and unapologetically so. I grew up in a very turbulent foster care situation. I had a vision for my life, the way that I wanted it to go. I had to be strong-willed. I had to be stubborn. I had to be insistent about it. Well, as I grew in my professional career, I realized that if I weren't attentive to creating cultures on my teams where I didn't invite that radical transparency, that was on me. So one of the things that I've learned to do on my teams is to ask, again, this is being mindful of my stubbornness and my insistence on a specific direction. I've learned to ask my teams, so what don't I know? What am I missing? And doing that almost at every meeting. And a lot of the times the feedback that I get, the pushback that I get, it does inform my thinking. And it cascades, a whole series of other things that are instructive and helpful. But those are the behaviors specifically. And so now my team knows that, boy, if I'm quiet in a meeting, he's going to call on me. He's going to ask for opposing views. Yeah.
When you think about recognition, I know there's many different ways to recognize someone, but when you are doing so much research around this, what are the different ways to recognize people, like small gifts versus medium size versus maybe something personal? I know I gave a client the other day something that was really personal to me, but very personal to him because he was a golfer. What are your thoughts on the ways to recognize someone?
Well, you're right. You do have a multiplicity of ways that you can do so. What we found to be the most effective is that that when an organization dedicates some percentage of their payroll, we've advocated that 1% should be is the break point at which you can see longer term impact. But you have the option, of course, to bestow monetary awards specifically, and that individual can take that award and do with it what they will. Let me give you an example. In my case, I have 3 children, 18, 16, and 13. My 16-year-old has big feet. He's a big boy, and he wears size 15 shoes, and I can't get them at a store. I have to order them online. So I have used my recognition moments within Global Force, and I am buying him sneakers. He plays varsity basketball, and so I am buying him sneakers all the time. But there isn't a moment that when I'm ordering these online, and I tell him this, I said, well, these are your Global Force sneakers because that's how I'm paying for them, because they're also really expensive, right? So, would you know that I had that specific need? Probably not, but there's still an emotional attachment and connection, to a recognition moment like that you're able to leverage. And lastly, I'm also, as somebody who receives that from others, I'm also more likely to bestow similar recognition moments as well. So somebody's recognizing me for a job well done, or a way that I leaned in on a specific issue, or when I was innovative or courageous or candid. Well, I'm going to do the same thing, right? And that creates this kind of ongoing perpetual recognition culture.
That's a good point there. What do you guys see in when a company starts to put this into effect? I could see kind of that snowball like rolling down the hill. Like it starts off a little bit slow, but as people start to get into the feel of it, it happens all the time, and it really does start to shift the culture.
Yeah, it does. I mean, one of our clients described their culture prior to engaging in this recognition platform as toxic and adversely based. In other words, currency in the organization was derived by spraying vinegar all over the place. So imagine being in meetings, right, where all these gotcha moments and all these adverse behaviors that weren't helping sustain the practice people want to get through their job. In other words, they weren't looking forward to Monday like at all. But early on, with seeding moments of positivity and impact, and you began to see over time, month in, 3 months in, 6 months in, that culture became more respectful, more innovative, more urgent, because currency was no longer derived with vinegar. It was derived with honey. I didn't mean that you weren't being candid, right, about needs around product development or driving sales faster, more aggressively. So you can have both of those things, but what it begat in terms of discretionary effort is almost immeasurable.
One of the things that you guys, are known for is positivity drives performance.
Yes.
What kind of stats or data you can share with me, or some of your research around positivity drives performance?
Well, one, we're just sitting in a current cultural context where negativity seems to drive so much of culture, right? So I think that people are just hungering for places in our broader society where they can see any moments of positivity when they're so hard to come by. Certainly not on the nightly news and not on social media timelines often. So where do you find them? Well, you can find them in the world of work. And one of the quantitative impacts that we've seen is retention, for example, that you're 2 to 3 times more likely to stay with an organization that recognizes positivity. That you're more likely, 2 or 3 times more likely to refer that organization to a friend or a colleague who's outside of it as a destination or a place, to work. We spend a lot of time, especially in the HR world, measuring and assessing things like productivity, and those two can be not just kind of words on the wall, but numbers in the spreadsheet, until you can draw that direct correlation between the number of recognition moments bestowed and the impact that it has on things like retention.
When you think about this recognition and whatnot, I mean, what are some of the things that we need to watch out for? Like, what are the mistakes that people make when they try to go too far in this?
Yeah, I mean, one of the bigger watch outs is to be cognizant of the importance, nevertheless, of still driving performance specifically. And so recognition should not be confused with creating a don't worry, be happy culture. So you see an emerging competitive challenge or issue both within the company or the external marketplace, and you say, well, don't worry, we'll get through it. Well, that's a watch out, because it should not catch you off guard when you see these competitive realities coming. What a recognition culture does, though, is allow you to get to the point of failing fast. You just get there faster, because you know that when mirrors are held up to the culture and or very specific challenges, it's coming from a place of company growth and not necessarily in currency being derived from just or advancing one's career through pointing out that which is wrong or adversely impacting the business. So it comes from a good place. We've heard that before. Recognition is a form of feedback. That's all true. Still been hard to digest for people, though, because I don't think it's always actionable and ultimately behavioral.
When you mentioned feedback there, my mind wonders, like, a lot of people just don't, or they frankly just suck at giving feedback.
Yeah.
When you look at, monetary or rewards being part of it, what is something else you guys have learned about giving feedback that could help us be better leaders?
It's the essence of the mirror, right? Mirrors aren't simply to reflect what you see. They're to reflect what you see so you can correct what you see. So on my team, as an example, I see all the recognition moments that my human resources team gets. So I see what they're being recognized for. I see who's getting recognized, but I also see who's not getting recognized too. And so that has forced a greater accountability upon me as a leader to make sure that the entire team is getting developed and is progressing, accordingly. And I also think it echoes something I've heard you talk about in the past. There's a difference between managing people and leading leaders. So there's a day-to-day responsibilities that you have for managing people, a lot of the administrative functions and approving vacations, for example, and project assignment, those things. But leading leaders gets more into the strategic area specifically. Recognition is one of the strongest, most effective ways to help leaders lead leaders at the same time, because you get to see who's doing what, how well they're doing it, and then how well is that being recognized across the organization. And to be equally candid, it also helps you to make some tough decisions on those who may be dragging your culture down too.
It's when you think about it that way, being able to have visibility into who's getting rewards, who's giving rewards, who's not getting them, as you said, that gives you some data points that you don't typically have in leadership.
No, because either, you have a team that, especially teams that are in aggressive growth mindsets, there's a little bit of cocooning of the leader. We're careful what information we give her.
Yeah.
And we're cautious about our feedback to him. So, when you have this kind of quantitative assessment for how recognition is employed across the entire organization, you have this kind of direct pipeline into where things stand. Certainly, that's how we talk about it too. I mean, we have a really good sense of how things are folding and unfolding, especially when we have to make some tough decisions, or in this case, where we are, anticipating, the beginning of a new year.
Steve, one of the last things I want to ask you around this is, what impact does this have on collaboration? I think a lot of companies say they want more collaboration, but I feel like this gives them a chance to ensure that, if someone helps you with a report and whatnot, that you could actually reward them, and that makes them want to keep doing that. What are your thoughts on collaboration?
Well, I've often thought that collaboration is the medicine you need, but you don't really like the taste of it necessarily, right? In the sense that you're dealing with issues of ownership and swim lanes and who gets credit. So there's a really short walk between saying I need collaboration and then the perception of who leads the effort. But on a platform that recognizes groups as a team, so cross-functional teams from product, from sales, from marketing, who are tasked with a specific project, and the entire team, gets recognized for that collaboration. So not just individual collaboration, but it's group collaboration, as well. And that's leadership's way of saying, hey, in recognizing this group for this specific effort, let's say at this conference, as an example, we're sending a signal to the rest of the organization. This is how we all ought to collaborate. So you're right. It's that age-old adage that, success happens when you don't care who gets the credit. And those are nice words, and I think that's true. But it's really, really hard to promote into behavior. So that's words on the wall. How do you make that behavior? Well, you make it behavior by recognizing group collaboration. And that means even in moments of tension, because collaboration tension is often the companion of collaboration. So you and I are going to have different views about how we tackle a specific project. You and I should have different views because we're not going to see it the same way. A conversation that begins, you and I are leaders of teams representing different functions, and you and I as leaders are saying, hey, well, let's make sure that our teams collaborate. And let's make sure that you and I are collaborating by bringing our different views, not trying to melt everybody's view down into one.
Part of my core message is around ownership. And it's not meant to be like the fiefdoms that have, controlled us in leadership. It's meant to be people who are willing to not blame others, like take ownership of this work. And not, at 9 to 5, it may not stop working beyond that. It goes beyond everything we're doing. So I really love, you sharing this conversation with us about what's going on in the world of recognition, what you're learning through this data and research. If our audience wanted to get in touch with you, where would you point them to?
Well, in the same spirit of recognition, the easiest thing to do is reach me directly at steve.pemberton at globoforce, GLOBOFORCE, globoforce.com. You can see a lot more about both Globoforce at globoforce.com, and also our annual conference that will be held in March in Nashville this year. It's called Work Human, and we talk a bit about some of the things that you and I are talking about, but on a much, much bigger scale. Have some of the world's most renowned speakers who come. It's really a great opportunity to see collaboration in real time, but you see recognition, you see gratitude, and you see the impact that has on businesses.
Well, Steve, thanks for these insights on recognition, and I can't wait to be able to share this with the world.
Thanks, Gene. Thanks for having me.
What a great interview here. I love having this conversation, going deep into one particular topic of recognition. I recognize my employees all the time. I love the work that they're doing, and I'm wondering how you're doing at it for your company, for your leadership. Are you recognizing the people that you really want to continue that behavior? Are you letting them grow? Are you recognizing collaboration? Well, if you want to be a better leader, if you want to evolve into the leader that you know is possible, then make sure you engage with Leaders in the Trenches, the podcast, but also connect with me. I'd love to know a little bit more about you, what you're doing, your company. Maybe you could be a guest on the show. As always, reach out to me. It's gene@genehammett.com. And this is Leaders in the Trenches. And I want to remind you, lead with courage, and I'll see you next time.